All right, hi everyone. I think this is live now. Thanks for coming to the AMA. I have the live chat open, so I'm going to be waiting for questions in the chat and taking them one by one. So please get started whenever you like. I think I have the chat open. Hi, Kryptonew. All right, I think this is working. How to increase adoption? That's the most important question. Well, I think one of the there's two aspects, I would say. One is trying to jump, and one is trying to grind a little bit. So on the grind part, it's basically trying to see where do we have adoption, how do we increase it, how do we just basically what intervention can we do that increases the number of, say, daily or monthly active addresses by 10%? Trying small experiments, seeing what worked particularly a little more. The free Tez experiment was one of those. It actually is relaunching as Tezos Quest. Trying to seed a few games, trying a few things, and then growing this basically little by little. It's just like climbing a gradient. And the other one is trying to do bigger jumps. So those bigger jumps could be trying to narrow down on a hit product that can have very large payoff, but is also very risky because it's very hard to engineer hits. And another approach to that is, I would say, the core engineering strategy, which is to say, build a platform that offers something that no other platforms offers. The main problem of adoption is that the whole industry has way more capacity, way more technologies, and there's actual demand for a lot of the blockchain applications. And so it's trying to say, well, maybe the application that don't exist today because the technology doesn't allow for it, and trying to build the technology. I would say that one engine of adoption for Tezos in 2021, 2022 was that it was early to proof of stake, and it attracted a lot of the NFT activities that we see on Tezos today. I think if we're fast to scale and to offer mainstream programming languages, it's not a guaranteed for adoption by any means, but it will be something that Tezos can offer that is not something that any other blockchain can offer. And obviously, everyone, I think, will do this over time, but there can be a window of time where this can be an advantage for adoption. So it's basically building the chain in such a way that people are building on Tezos not because they're getting grants, not because they're fans of Tezos or anything like that, but because it's just the only place that they can build because the technology is not available anywhere else. Wondering what my top priorities are in the coming year. Budget control is one. So the foundation historically has kept a lot of its treasuries in Bitcoin, plus a liquidity basis, which was essentially like enough to cover for the next 2 years. And the rationale here was that you don't want to be caught and not have money to pay your bills if somehow there's a crash in the Bitcoin market, but also if there's a big bull market, you want to be able to be in the race. You want to be able to spend more in the bull market to basically keep up. And that part worked in the sense of like the foundation did end up having a much larger treasury during the bull market. The part that didn't work was trying to increase spending to try to keep up. Unfortunately, that didn't pan out. And the flip side of that is that if there's a contraction after that is to be able to cut down on spending. So bringing the spending of the foundation, there's already a lot of work that's been done since 2022 to do that. But bringing it to a very sustainable level, I think, is the most important thing, because a sustainable level of spending gives the foundation time. It gives time to figure out what is the best adoption strategy. It gives time to run experiments. It gives time to basically set up Tezos for success. So that's priority number one. Priority number two is adoption. But like I said, I don't think that core development and adoption are, don't go hand in hand. With the reason I'm passionate about core development is not because I think it's a cool gadget or just for the sake of technology. It's because I think it can be the best engine for adoption. Today, I would say Tezos is better than a lot of blockchain platform, but is it sufficiently better that people are going to flock to this? No, there's a lot of arguments today for picking incumbents who are larger, who have more adoption, more communities, who are feel like a safer choice. So it's not just enough to be better, it has to be much, much better. So priorities is really helping to the extent that I can. Some of the core teams deliver on a scaling roadmap. And in terms of adoption, trying to have a really good handle on user acquisition cost and becoming very quantitative, essentially, about adoption, and as opposed to trying to be qualitative and saying like, oh well, this area is interesting, this area is interesting. Number 3 priorities, I would say, is ensuring that they are good and strong senior figures within the Tezos ecosystem who can help make this happen. You know, at the end of the day, I'm a board member of the Tezos Foundation. I help. I'm also a director at Tech. I also help a lot of teams with advice whenever I can. So I bring this, but you know, I'm just one person. It's very important to have this type of senior talent, and I would say like focusing on trying to help recruit some of that talent is a big factor. How do I see Oxford going forward? If it gets corrected, do you think big bakers will go for it or lost cause? Well, Oxford is not adaptive issuance. Adaptive issuance is a completely separate thing. It's a separate thing, and it has a separate vote in Oxford, and I think that's important. For me, it's not obvious at all that adaptive issuance is a good idea. It's not obvious that it's a bad idea. If you ask me on the fence, I would lean towards thinking it's good, but it's by no means a guarantee. However, I want to make sure that the debate around it is high quality, because we do need to have a high quality debate around it. The way I see it, there's many advantages to adaptive issuance in terms of, let's say, compatibility with the real world, compatibility with tax codes, compatibility with the restriction that regulators are putting on exchanges and consortiums around staking, compatibility with lending markets. So in terms of compatibility and also composability of contracts, there's huge advantages. And it's very similar to what a lot of the blockchains who are doing proof of stake are doing in this environment, where essentially they target a certain level of staking and then they adjust the budget based on that. It's not a mechanism that was obvious to me, I would say, early on in the design of Tezos. It's one that I would have used had I known about it. The flip side, of course, is that it's a change. It's a big change for the staking mechanism. It's a big change for the Tezos ecosystem. So you know what we have, and we know that what we have is working. We have a decentralized community of bakers. The chain is running. The chain is not being attacked. So that's good, and you know, we know that we have that. It's also the case that probably there's a lot of people who just enjoy the fact of receiving baking rewards, and if you take, and you know, it might be, you know, it might not be very meaningful because they come from inflation, but if it's meaningful to them and it's like attracts them to Tezos and you take that away, there's a risk here. So there's, I think, potentially very strong benefit, potentially very real risk. So if you ask me like why I lean slightly in favor of it, I would say that in the position that we are, it's better to take risk than to try. You know, it's better to try to like change things than to try to preserve what we that we have. To be honest, but to go back to the argument, Oxford is not about that, and that's why there's a separate vote, because you don't want core development teams essentially to have to maintain a version of the code base with adaptive issuance or without adaptive issuance and then propose different version every single time. So the general idea of trying to use different signaling mechanism is say, look, there's a kind of like technical upgrade that happen regularly. It's just like improving how the rollups work, improving a few instructions. There's a couple of maintenance things. You don't want that to be tied to a long debate about adaptive issuance. That should happen separately, and that I think is the value of having signaling mechanism. It lets you evolve in parallel. So for me, if there's a healthy debate around like, hey, is this worth it? Should we do it? I think that's fantastic. If the debate is like, oh, the EMA is unfair or it's bad, or that's terrible. That's terrible because it's a bad argument, and I don't want to go out and say like, this is a bad fucking argument, because if I do that, then I think I send a message of like, oh, Arthur wants adaptive issuance to happen. No, I want the debate to happen, and for the debate to happen, it's not going to happen if we're going to have bad economic arguments or like bad faith arguments around governance. So, you know, as possible, we should discuss like what change it causes in the Tezos ecosystem, while also understanding clearly the proposal. And to be fair, there's been a lot of very useful feedback from makers. In particular, I had a lot of discussions with Alex from P2P.org, lots of useful feedback. So whatever happens in terms of code base, there's a lot of learning that comes from that. I wish that there was a little more involvement earlier on in the process. I also think on the side of the core, this was done quickly, and I think more time should have been spent communicating around the implementation. It was run as a sprint, which I think is also why bugs happen in it. So I would say the way it was developed in the first place, which wasn't focused on documentation first and was a bit rushed, is probably part of the problem. Are there strategies in the works to try to attract devs who will use WASM-enabled languages? So WASM is really the base platform. There's several products you can think of in Tezos, and Smart Rollup is one of these products. So Smart Rollup is a product of saying like, oh, I want to build a completely custom rollup, and I'm going to bring that to Tezos. And I can build it in Rust that compiles to WASM, or I can build it in Go and all of that. That's a product we want to have. I don't think it's a product that's going to be super popular. I think people, if they run dApp chains, are probably going to do things like fork the code of Etherlink and run this. And we've seen this basically in the Polkadot ecosystem, which has Substrate, which is also WASM-based. If you want to build a Polkadot parachain, it's also WASM-based, and mostly people just fork Sputnik, which is their implementation of the EVM. So we support that, but I don't say this is where a lot of adoption is going to come from. What's more directly relevant, I think, is supporting these languages not as the base on which to write a rollup, but as smart contract languages inside of like very scalable rollups. So that's basically the Tezos 2.0 vision, which is like having mainstream languages like Java, like .NET, Python, JavaScript, and being able to just run all that in inside a rollup. What use cases or cases do you see get us closest to adoption? I like a few areas. So in general, I would say DeFi is a big area. It's one that has the most proven market fit, product market fit in the industry. It's a bit circular now. I think this is fine to succeed at circular DeFi first, and then potentially bring more real-world asset into it. Gaming, I'm still quite interested in gaming. There's still potential. I think it's not been done correctly in the industry because the value prop of the blockchain is not sufficient. So I think focusing on trading games, focusing on wagering are probably where there's product market fit here. And arts and collectible, we have a beautiful artist community on Tezos. It's very active. I would say visual arts, absolutely gorgeous. I love taking part in it. If we want to 10x, 100x the adoption, music strikes me still as one of the most likely venue because a lot more people collect music or are interested in music as an art form than visual arts. Who is in charge of communicating with the press about Tezos? So the foundation works with they used to work with a firm called Stranger Strategies. They now work with a PR person, a guy named Benjamin Robertson, who was a recent hire. He was a journalist for the blog. He's been a journalist also at I think Bloomberg, and he is working out of the Trilitech office in London, and he's been basically helping with a lot of the PR work. Lol, he's an AI. Okay, no. The new president of the Tezos Foundation, Alexis Bonte, is also the CEO of Silfront. This being the case, can he focus on Tezos enough? So the role of the council, the council of the Tezos Foundation is not an executive council. They are not operational. That's not their role. It's a governance role. So the role of the Tezos Foundation essentially is to look at the conduct of the foundation, is to look at the executive team of the foundation, and basically, make sure that they're doing a good job, make sure, and that's based on getting enough information from them, getting reports, seeing, how much money is being spent, what are the results, tracking KPI, tracking metric. So yes, I think he has the time to do this. He's also specifically made time for this role. But primarily on a day-to-day basis, the type of activity, I would say, is more on the executive director side of the Tezos Foundation, or within the various entities that are funded by the Tezos Foundation. What is the red on my jacket? It's not an NSA chip. No, it's a bit of coral. It's not coral, but it looked like coral. I was recently beaten because of talking about crypto and shilling Tezos. I hope you were not physically beaten for it. How are you, now you're dealing with this kind of problem, if you ever had such? Well, I certainly hope you were not physically beaten. I would recommend going to the police if that has happened. I have not been physically beaten in a long time. I think that happened when I was like very young in junior high school, and it was a terrible experience. A lot of schools are prison for children, but the thing is, like, I don't shill. That's the first thing. I love Tezos, and I talk about it, but like, to the disappointment of many people, I don't actually shill. Look, if people are assholes to you, don't engage with them. It's probably the best thing to do. I'm going to challenge you one. Do not use thin. Okay, I'm not sure what that means. Go Muay Thai boot camp. Yeah, that's a good one. I would say if you look at basically like the type of thing that wins in MMA, it's kind of like a combination between boxing and jiu-jitsu. So it's like if you do Muay Thai and if you do Brazilian jiu-jitsu, you probably have a good combination. But again, it's like, and it can be fun. But again, if your environment is one where you actually need to pick up martial arts to defend yourselves, I would say first change your environment. Like this is a bad sign. Do you know some products that are going to be built on EtherLink? Yes. So there are BD teams who are looking at helping bring projects on EtherLink. There's always there's always a BD pipeline, and in fact, one of the value of EtherLink is that some of that BD pipeline sometimes says like, look, we love working with you, but we absolutely want to build EVM. So this actually means that these people don't have to be turned away anymore and can actually build on EtherLink. How do we make Tezos relatable? It seems that no matter what it does, it's just not relevant anymore. Yeah, that's a big. That's the biggest question. It's like Tezos is not part of the discussion, and even you'll find like articles that say like here's the top 30 rollup solutions, and they will list like really obscure stuff, and not list Tezos. How did that happen? And I'm not sure. I think there's a recency bias. The fact that it's been around for a while, actually, you could think it's like, well, it's resilient. It's been there for a while. It's serious. It hasn't been attacked and so on and so forth. But there's a bit of a recency bias because people want something that's kind of new and exciting. And Tezos is new and exciting because of all the upgrades and developments. But perception is not there. It could be that a lot of trend setting is done in the US and the product is like very much not present in the United States. So I think that's potentially part of it. I would say like insufficient comms and like mistargeted marketing, I think could be part of it. It could be that, I don't know, one theory that I have is like you can be hot and new and exciting and have hype, or you can be an old incumbent, and we're neither. It's like we're not an old incumbent because there's just not enough adoption, and we're not a hot newcomer. So how do we deal with that? One is like marketing the new upgrades on Tezos and the new developments as making it a hot newcomer. And the other aspect is like just like grinding your way to like have 100,000, 500,000 monthly active users and saying like, look, you can't ignore it. It's just there. It's like it has some success in adoption, but just not enough that it can say like we're clearly up there with all of like these big platforms. So that's kind of, I would say, the biggest tension, and it's really hard to address. And I don't know, like I feel like at the same time it could either be like, oh, this is this one stupid thing that we overlooked, or it could be a very long list of things. I don't know how these ideas get formed. Is it a bunch of Telegram rooms or Discord rooms where people talk to each other and actually you got to talk to 10 people, and then once that happens, it kind of like spreads? It's not clear because Tezos is highly respected. If you talk to a lot of technical founders, if you talk to a lot of people in the space, Tezos is still like highly respected in terms of technologies. The art scene on Tezos is also highly respected, but people don't talk about it. And do they not talk about it because it's old and not big enough, or do they not talk about it because other people are not talking about it? I also feel this is an industry where everyone is kind of afraid of sounding stupid, and so you say, well, wow, if I say Tezos, no one's saying Tezos, do I look weird? I'm not sure. I think there's a relevance gap. I definitely think like we're a lot less mentioned or relevant in the zeitgeist compared to like where it is in absolute terms. But closing that gap is very hard. What is the point of going to 1 million TPS, or whereas blocks are not filled with 200 TPS? Do you not feel like you're building infrastructure in the middle of the desert? My friend, this entire industry is building infrastructure in the middle of the desert. It's been compared to the railroad for a good reason. People built railroads in the middle of nowhere in the US, and also you had boosterism where people say the railroad is coming, buy the plots in this town. That's what the entire industry is doing. However, the alternative is we don't do this and everyone else does, and then go and ask someone to build on Tezos, and they say, well, there's only 200 TPS. What if I have a lot of traffic? You can't just tell people, oh, well, we'll build it. And it was a real topic, by the way. In 2021, I remember fees were very cheap, and people say, like, well, fees may be cheap on Tezos, but that's just because you don't have enough activity. If you start having activity, then obviously they will spike, and I don't want to build here. So it's not just about, like, the demand, it's also about being able to say, look, we're not just cheap, we're credibly cheap. It's not incredibly, credibly cheap, meaning, like, even if we have a ton of adoption, it's going to stay cheap. And that's what you get by having 1 million TPS. You also get potentially applications which would not use a blockchain in the first place because they feel that, you know what, they need at least 50,000 TPS for whatever they want to do. So we can do it. It's a differentiator. If we're not going to have this for differentiator, what are we going to have? Because the differentiator cannot be and will not be, oh, well, the foundation is paying you to build there. That just doesn't work. So if there's better tech differentiator for Tezos, I'm all ears. But as far as I can tell, the best one that we can have is interop, good developer experience, high throughput, low latency. Going full compatibility with EVM isn't a shift in the narrative since day one. And the white paper, Tezos' plans were to fight the weakness limitation of BTC and ETH. Well, Tezos doesn't talk too much. The Tezos white paper doesn't talk too much about the limitation of Ethereum because Ethereum is very new at the time. It talks a little bit of it. No, it's not a shift in narrative. The whole point of the narrative is that it can adapt to anything that people want. And if people want EVM, we can do EVM. It's also not a shift to EVM. It's a shift for adding EVM compatibility. And I would say it's transitory. I think the plan is to actually leapfrog EVM and go towards languages like Java, .NET, Python, JavaScript. It's it's challenging the whole idea that, oh wow, Solidity has won. No, it has like a few thousand developers. There's a lot of, I would say there's a little hanging fruit in going after more mainstream languages. As Testdown community founder, again, we better connect with you, the foundation. I mean, I'm pretty accessible. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Reddit. I tend to I'm on Discord as well. I tend to answer questions when asked. I can't answer questions for the foundation, as a whole. Foundation needs better comm. It's been very hard to find good comms people. They either are afraid of putting their foot in their mouth and say nothing, or they put their foot in their mouth. So it's been a process. How can we better get ambassadors and help with retention? There's a few ambassador programs that have been put in place. There's one, but I think they were on hold. So there was those comments is working on an ambassador program. There was a guy also at Tech that was working in developer adoption who was also trying to set up an ambassador program. I don't think he did it. He's no longer with us. So it's still pending. But yeah, absolutely. I would say that's the thing that scales very well. So having ambassadors and having meetups around the world, I think, is like a very, very cost effective and really good way of spreading the message. How do I intend to develop the activity of Tezos in France and abroad in the coming, taking into account the highly worldwide competition? How to improve in the influence of the chain? So Tezos is quite successful in France, all things considered, and the way that you fight network effect usually is by having localized network effect. Facebook, for example, didn't take on MySpace initially by launching everywhere. They did so by launching in Harvard and then in Ivy League schools. So having a base in France and then expanding that to Belgium, Germany, Spain, countries in Western Europe can be helpful. There's also regional BD happening in Asia, specifically around Indonesia. So I would say focus on localized market, grow there, become dominant there, and progressively improve. In my opinion, what is the most meaningful DeFi protocol on Ethereum? Today the most important ones are probably Uniswap and Aave, and Uniswap is relentlessly innovating. We've seen again with Uniswap X. Aave has done a lot of things right, although Aave is quite dependent on Chainlink today. And in terms of the DeFi protocols that I look at more generally speaking, I think GMX is very interesting. I think they do a few things wrong, but they do a lot of things right that have been very successful at attracting trading, and it's by fees, it's one of the most successful protocol there is out there. But fundamentally, what do people don't want to do in DeFi? They want either to borrow against their assets, and it's similar, they want to trade with leverage, and then a little bit of derivative activity, but that's smaller. Those are the main use cases for DeFi. It's borrowing and trading. How do NFTs work on this new major L2? Do they need to get bridged from L1 to L2, or is it just a transaction? How will this work? Asking as an NFT game, thinking of adding and migrating to L2. So, optimistic rollup with Tezos have a native bridge. Depositing from L1 to L2 is instant, so you can deposit your NFT from the L1 to L2, and it will just work in 1 or 2 blocks, so very, very quickly. Withdrawing from L2 to L1, long time. Right now it takes 2 weeks. So if it's fungible assets, it's possible to do this with a swap. So essentially, someone has a fungible asset on one chain, someone has a fungible asset on the other. So you do a quick withdrawal by just swapping your assets for a small fee. So in terms of UX, that works. The UX right now of having an NFT on L2 and moving it to L1 is not good. That's definitely a thing where support is going to be weak. So either you stay on L2 essentially, or you use a bridging mechanism, like a type of multi-sig bridge to wrap your assets from one to the other. Because I think few people are going to want to wait 2 weeks to move an NFT from one chain to another. So you're definitely hitting on one of the weaknesses today of the L2 L1 paradigm, which is also why I'm bullish fundamentally on just having one big L2 where most of the activity is taking place that's compatible with many languages, because then you don't really have to worry about this withdrawal. At the end of the day, you only move Tez between the main chain and the rollup, and all the assets just live on a rollup. I'm going to many ETH hackathon and try to visualize for Tezos, but first things devs checks is the market cap and then interest fade away. How do we fix the market cap? This is the main KPI. Well, I think it's a problem that people look at market cap as a proxy for adoption. It can hide a lot of things. It can hide a lot, for example, of overhang. A lot of projects have 90% of their tokens being held by some VC, and because they're not moving in the market, it will give the appearance of a higher market cap. So if these people are basing it on that, already they're committing a pretty big mistake. But at the same time, it's reality that they look at that. It's reality that they're taking it, and unfortunately, so it means it's important. But just because it's important doesn't mean it's actionable. The type of things that the entities that work around the Tezos ecosystem can do on a daily basis. Can they work towards marketing and greater awareness? Absolutely. Can they work towards better adoption? Yes. Can they make the chain better? They can do all of these things. There is no guarantee that any of that translates into price appreciation. Now you have regulators in the US who argue that, of course, because they're developers, that means expectation of profit. That's actually nonsense, and you can actually see this statistically. Fundamentally, these things trade on sentiment. There's no economic link between the use of a protocol and the value of its token. Even people who try to claim that there's going to be an economic link because of burnt fees, because chains are going to be scaling, fundamentally, I think fees are going to be quite low. So it's really about perception and being seen as a store of value. and that's very, very elusive. It's not something that can be directly targeted. So it may be, it may be important, but it's not a KPI that's very targetable. KPIs that you can target are things like awareness, social media presence, number of active users, number of applications. All of this can be targeted, which also doesn't guarantee success, but at least there's it's tractable in some ways. In terms of adoption, where do we see the biggest growth area for Tez in the next 5 years? Any particular areas that is not yet active that you would promote more activities in? I think it's I have theories, but I'm very much now in the camp of trying experiments and trying to really be very data-driven on to what works and what doesn't. Again, I still think DeFi gaming and collectibles are probably the biggest area of growth. Stuff that hasn't been tapped, I've mentioned before, there are ways to do real-world asset in DeFi that could be interesting. There's with gaming, of course, the usual thing is that a mediocre game has more users than a successful blockchain. And areas, I still think the trust and estate industry has been under-tapped by cryptocurrencies, but it's not clear. I think there's a lot of culture, product fit, but it's not clear what the actual product can be. So it's something that's definitely overlooked, but it's not something that's easy to just launch in. I'm excited about non-financial apps like watermarking and provenance tracking of digital products. Not especially. If someone comes tomorrow and say, "Oh, you know what? It's great for me. I want to watermark my stuff. I want to do supply chain tracking on Tezos." By all means, here's some help. And I'm not going to tell people that says this solves a problem for me. I'm not going to go and say no, it doesn't. You shouldn't use the blockchain. So I don't. If they want to use it, I trust them. Do I personally think it's worth putting a lot of effort towards this type of use cases? Probably not, because I don't. A lot of the time, the problem is that I don't see the blockchain as fundamentally solving a problem in this space. Your problem you have is one of basically signatures and digitalization, and the timestamping on the chain doesn't really add that much. I think chains are at their best when you're actually moving assets, and assets are changing hands, like trading. So hence DeFi, but also hence collectibles, and hence gaming is as soon as you have a trading component, that's where it's best at. I'm excited about, So are there plans to continue collecting art for the Tezos Foundation art collection? Would you consider putting together a board of people versus a single creator? There's no concrete plan. There's no plan not to, but there's no concrete plan to. One of the projects that's been going on has been the Champ Medici projects, which is different, but about basically identifying some talent and helping them launch. But for the Tezos Foundation permanent collection, no concrete plans. Something I would say that probably, I can't speak for the whole board, but I think it's probably something that the board would be open to, because by and large, I think that the collection was a success. And yes, obviously if that was the case, having a board of curation versus a single creator, interesting question. I'm not an expert here. I would probably want to ask what people in the arts feel. Is it someone's vision as a curator that you have, or is it more of a collective decision? My own inclination, again, with the caveat that I don't know too much about this, is that having an individual take and rotating people can be more powerful than just having a decision by committee. But again, I would really defer to people who know a lot more about this space than I do. What's my vision for DeFi in clearly increasing regulatory environment? How can we fill the gap? Yeah, that's the biggest. My biggest surprise is a lot of that there was not a stronger attack on DeFi in 2021. I thought it would be a lot more relentless. I think I mentioned this in an interview recently. I think some things might have to give, especially if you want to do real-world assets. So, for DeFi with real-world assets, I think some form of KYC, like whitelisting of addresses, and you've seen some of that on Aave. I think they'll have to give, because fundamentally, I don't think surveillance is something that governments are willing to give up. But other things, I think it might be resilient to. So we might end up with something that still makes some sense. But it's definitely tricky, and there's been a lot of obviously a lot of attacks. That being said, concretely, I would say almost all of these attacks have come from the United States. I don't know that outside of the United States there's been that strong or that much of an attack on DeFi. So maybe the answer is that DeFi evolves to basically like ruthlessly blocks the United States. I joke sometimes that there needs to be like a there are DAOs who try to say like proof of human DAO is like proof of non-American DAO. Like maybe that's what the world needs. Say what you will about China, when they decide that they don't want their citizen to do something, they see it as their responsibility to block their citizen from doing so. Whereas in the United States, it's everyone in the world's responsibility to block Americans, which is an insane take. But they run the banks, and so basically they can enforce court orders everywhere in the world. I am running a public Tezos validator with 99.9% reliability. I just baked 2 blocks. Congratulations. I can't find delegators beside myself and my other wallets. Any advice? I have not been a public baker, so I don't really have good advice to give you. I would actually go on the baking Slack, talk to the bakers, and see what they have to say. So the most generic advice I could say is be active in the community, post on Reddit, post on Twitter, post on Discord. I think a lot of the people you might be able to attract are people who are looking for active bakers, and active in the sense of like doing things in the community, and that might be a helpful way to grow your delegate audience. What am I drinking? I'm drinking Coke Zero. It's generally my drink of choice. If only the digital objects of all Ubisoft games have been on Tezos would have attracted other publishers. The communication has been disastrous. The product is dead. Can I confirm? No, Quartz is still actually Quartz is still active. I think that the launch of Ubisoft obviously did not go well at all. They had this very disliked YouTube video. I think there's a matter of timing, and there was a bit of a rebellion of gamers against NFTs. It's understandable. I mean, 99% of the NFT space has been a grift. And I don't think this is what Ubisoft is doing at all. If anything, I think it gives more power to gamers to have like control of their in their items. But when they see Axie Infinity and when they see a lot of the rug pulls, it's an understandable thing, and it's hard to communicate a subtle difference. But Ubisoft is still active in doing games, and there are still conversations with Ubisoft. So no, it's not. It's definitely not dead. It doesn't. It's definitely not the case that tomorrow Ubisoft is not going to put all of its digital items on Tezos either. So it's still something that's being experimented with. When I go to real-world events, I'm often the only one in the room that has ever heard of Tezos. People are interested, but I have to turn more opportunities that I can take due to funding. Tezos is relevant, just not talking to the people who are looking for us. Tezos Foundation and Tezos Commons, unresponsive to build community or doing real-world speaking mentorship for Tezos. Tezos Foundation, yes, tends to be unresponsive, but they're mostly a body that's here to process grants, do budget controls on the treasuries, this type of things. It's not supposed to be like this very, very active body. I have not found Tezos Commons to be unresponsive originally. I find them quite active. But if you have suggestions for them in how they could be more active, how they could be more responsive, I think they'd be quite open to feedback. And your experience is interesting, so please email me, send me some details of what your experience has been going to real-world events. I think this is exactly the type of feedback that's quite helpful. How come we come across as clowns, like the USDC announcement, like OpenSea? I don't think we come up as clown. I think OpenSea and USDC come up as clown in the announcements. They say they're going to do something and they don't do it. This management around OpenSea, we could have been in Solana's place in terms of market cap. I do not think so. First of all, we did not have FTX. We did not have a criminal enterprise spending billions propping it up. I think, yes, if we had a criminal enterprise spending billions propping up Tezos, maybe we could. But we did not have that. And definitely not OpenSea would not have done that. Would it have helped? Absolutely. Absolutely. What happened with OpenSea? Not clear. I've heard different theories. They said they were going to integrate, and I think they were talking to some teams at TQ at the time, and TQ was telling them, oh, it's fine on timelines. And then TQ kind of decided to dissolve. I think they were in a chat room on the TQ Slack. TQ left, and apparently they didn't really know who to talk to, so there's a bit of a communication thing. But very quickly we talked to them, and they realized that, oh, actually, you know what? We're just going to integrate other EVM chains because it's easier. So I think there was a timing thing. They became very, very successful, and they figured like it's better for us to use all of our engineering resources in trying to grow and trying to capture that bull market than trying to integrate other chains. So when we talked to them, which was super early in November of 2020, for them it was interesting to get this grant money and to try to do a Tezos integration. And the follow-up on like pushing the grantee, pushing the integration, tracking this is something that's done way better today, but absolutely wasn't in place in 2020 or even in 2021. But I would say it's extremely disappointing that they didn't say, you know what, we have a commitment, and it doesn't matter if right now we can grow, we have to honor our commitment. They're not doing very well right now, and they have raised rounds at 12 billion valuation with anti-dilution provision. I think one of them had a criminal conviction as part of OpenSea. So these things happen. I agree with mentioning developers not aware of Tezos. The current marketing campaign do not target them well. Do we have to change campaign targets? I think targeting developers is a great way to do this. The developer adoption and developer advocate team has grown a lot. I think video is a great medium. You should start seeing a lot more videos on a Tezos channel. But also in general, just like people being present, coming to events, talking to developers. If you look at people who were very successful at growth in 2021, the two that I usually look to are Polygon and Solana, with very different strategies. Polygon was a very BD-centric strategy. They had really bad, unremarkable technology, but they hired 70 BD people and said just like bring as many people as you can on Polygon. They also had a huge ETH treasury. So they spent a ton of money trying to just bring as much activity, bring as much project as possible on Polygon, and a lot of just like canvassing the ground, plus a narrative of like, oh, it's just like building on Ethereum with lower fees, but you are on Ethereum. Just temporarily, it's not a shard, but it will be. So that worked really, really well for them. Compared to Solana, who had an alpha product, but at least had like technical benefits like very low latency and a high throughput, and they did super well at attracting developers, and they target outside of this ecosystem. So basically going to web developers, building these huge hacker houses, and having a pipeline with VCs. VC funding has dried up a lot in this space, and it costs them a lot of money to do this. So I don't think we're beginning exactly what Solana did is necessarily a good idea in 2023. It was the right thing to do in 2021, not necessarily in 2023. But focusing on, I would say, really good developer tooling is important, really good developer experience, extremely good documentation. Those are things which are not as expensive, I would say, as like running a big techno party in a hacker house, but can have outside effects. And then also developer advocacy, like people talking to the developer community. Why not make hackathon on Tezos more common? We had a lot of hackathons actually going on via Gitcoin through 2021 and 2022 with large prizes. They haven't really panned out. Like a lot of them were won by like professional hackathon winning teams. They just like build something, get a prize, and then they move on. So there's not that many projects that have come out of these hackathons. I mean, Hick and Nuke came out of a hackathon, so sometimes it's outsized results. I think the HEC hackathon in Paris was also quite good. There's another one that's being planned. But by and large, it's not enough, I would say. My question is, what's the point of crypto when AGI is going to kill us all in 18 months? Well, I don't think AGI is going to kill us all in 18 months. Do I think it's possible in 5 to 10 years? I think there's a high chance, and it makes me extremely uncomfortable. Not in 18 months. But then you might ask, what is the point of doing anything, if AGI is coming? Even if it doesn't kill us, if AGI, if there's a singularity, whether it's a positive or negative singularity in the next couple of years, why do anything? Why not just go out and touch grass? That's a great question. But, this, regardless, I think there's a limited amount of touching the grass that you can do in your life. Like there's diminishing return on hedonism. There's, there's not that much you can get out of more walks on the beach. And so you might as well act as if somehow there's going to be a plateau in AI and AI is not going to give us a singularity in the next 20 years. I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think it's going to happen much faster than that. But you might as well live your life as if, it's not going to happen right away, because otherwise very little you can do. There's very little you can do anyway. So I would say on the margin, maybe be a little more hedonistic, but other than that, just basically like try to act as if AI is going to be big and disruptive, but not singularity causing, which again is not the most likely scenario, but the one you can probably operate under in terms of making like decision for your life. Do I think blockchains allowing for nodes to run behind Tor is important for the future of crypto? That's a great question. I think right now there's not enough of a demand for that. I think right now if like Tezos positioned itself as saying like it's great because you can run node behind Tor, there's just not enough of a demand for this to be competitive. So I think it's better right now to push for lower latency, not latency low enough that everyone's running out of AWS. For me, the sweet spot probably is like you're not on Tor, but you're running out of like Starlink in the middle of the savannah. For me, that gives you a really high level of decentralization, and you can still probably do like a couple second latency. So the other thing that's possible as well, especially with L2s, is sequencing. So a sequencer, there's a joke on Twitter, which is like a decentralized sequencer is basically a blockchain, and I tend to agree with that. But a blockchain and a sequencer have different trade-offs. So the blockchain trade-off is that the validators they can censor and they can create double spend and safety faults. So you want them to be extremely decentralized for that, and you might need to have higher latency for this to happen. In the sequencers, they cannot cause censorship. They can cause delays, but not censorship. And they cannot cause safety fault. They can extract a lot of MEVs though. So overall, if you had a curve which is like how decentralized you are versus how low latency you are, I would say you should be comfortable with lower latency on the sequencers than you would on an L1. So having like a decentralized L1 for settlement and a decentralized sequencer for ordering, it feels a bit like a gas factory on the one hand, but they have slightly different trade-offs, so that maybe that's possible. So maybe you end up with an L1 where you actually increase the latency, where you have like 10-minute latency, everyone runs behind Tor, and then a very low latency sequencer, which could be the same nodes, but not necessarily exactly the same. So interesting design ideas in these areas. NFTs L1 to L2. We should think that dApps will ever live in L1 or L2 only. Asset movement should be exceptional between L1 and L2. Okay, that's just a comment. How much would it cost the foundation, if technically possible, to give for free a decentralized ID in 1 or 2 countries, like France? We need for 1,000 reasons. Well, they are. I mean, what do you mean by a decentralized ID? If you just mean like some inscription on the blockchain that's like your address and something like there's an ID scheme on Tezos or like or a Tezos domain, not that much. If you mean like you said, a decentralized ID in 1 or 2 countries. So if it's an ID in a country, like it's not really decentralized. So like offer some sort of e-residency on the chain to users. There are a few countries offering e-residency. You see them at booths in conferences. I think one of the reasons they do it is like people want e-residency. If there are limits in their countries for accessing exchanges, it's probably one of the biggest use cases for it in crypto today. And I think they still use that for like $200 a year. So could the foundation sponsor people for $200 to get it on the chain? Like in theory, yes, and maybe you'd get some people do it. But I don't think they would necessarily use Tezos after that. They would just get their saying, and like, how does it actually translate in terms of activity on Tezos? Not that much. What's the main reason for not having a good crypto payment system? Do I think we'll eventually get to a point where we'll be able to pay Tez in stores? Thing is, like, I don't think there's a lot of demand to pay in stores. Even if you could build the infra for it, it's like very few people want to pay in crypto unless they have to. My experience paying in store is I just wave my phone in front of the thing and it works. And it's in fiat currency and it just works. There's a lot of things where payment experience is absolutely horrible. Like making international wires is terrible, and crypto is actually great for that, and you actually see it being used. So it has to be much better than the alternative for it to not just the same, but like much better. And I don't think in-store payments is an area where it has the potential of being much better. Even if it's a stable coin, right? It's not. I don't even think it's about the it's about the volatility. It's about the fact that why do a settlement on a chain for something like that. Yes, there's credit card fees, but the friction in like getting any type of store adoption is above this. And also, we should learn like every single crypto payment option that people have tried has failed. Coinbase started out as a payment company, moved into an exchange. It's worth keeping an eye on. Who knows? Maybe it's because scalability wasn't there. Maybe it's because transactions were too expensive. So it's always worth keeping an eye on. It's not something where I would just basically like launch and say like, oh my God, this is definitely it. Hit up some Discords with active users like TZ Raffles or Tezos community. We can promote you or help with. Okay, that's. Do you think dev participants on X platform will bring more awareness? I constantly auto blockchain talking and getting people on their own platform. Very little on Tezos. Completely agree. Yes, I think devs need to be more vocal on X. I can't call it X. Sorry, it's Twitter. So devs need to be more vocal on Twitter. But we've seen more of that. I would say that, for example, Regis Yanas from the Medic Lab has been posting, and Sarah Pui also has been posting. So we have a few devs who are being a little more vocal on social media, and I absolutely encourage that. I think that's great. How much would it cost the foundation if it's technically possible to give as the network has become more decentralized, does it plan to burn or stop the foundation bakers? Well, you can't burn the bakers. So like the foundation, like in theory, the foundation could burn the Tez that it has, or it could stop baking. Now let's go through this. First of all, today, the fact that the foundation has a much smaller holding of Tez than most of the foundation in a market where people care profoundly about decentralization for a store of value, this is something that mattered. In 2016, 2017, it was completely anathema for any projects to keep more than say 10-20% of tokens. Today, the norm is that you keep 90%, and that's how a lot of the economy around these blockchains is done. Like large airdrops, people doing this large airdrop of token because they own 90% of the supply. It causes these inflated market caps, and it lets them, basically just spend their token freely willy. Not the case with the Tezos Foundation, and so having, the fact that it doesn't have that much Tez is already, I would say, in this market, in the way, with the narrative that we have, and with the way that people think about blockchain today, it's a disadvantage. And so having even less is probably not an advantage. And stopping the bakers is fundamentally similar to burning. It's just like you're burning the reward in some sense. And again, I don't think a good idea. I think like the foundation doesn't own that much of the supply, certainly not enough to threaten decentralization. I don't think you should try to necessarily own a lot less. The other thing is like, for people who think that that burning token that sits in a foundation somehow has some effect on market cap, you will be sorely disillusioned. Look at what happened to Stellar, for example, when they tried to burn. Like these things fundamentally don't work. We need more Tez merch, make it more visible. I also like the idea to add ambassadors. We need it. Yeah, okay. So that's agreement. Yes, ambassadors, merch. Merch is great. I think we need to go beyond t-shirts. Or actually, one thing I like, TZ APAC has done a bunch of t-shirts in collaboration with some artists in Asia. And so having a t-shirt that's not just, like the Tezos logo, but has like various artists being featured is a really good thing. You want a t-shirt that you really want to wear because it looks so awesome, and not just because it makes you, not just to be a walking billboard. How would you feel if Tezos became a chain that shitcoins launch on, like Arbitrum has somehow become? And do you think that shitcoin culture helps in adoption? I would like as much adoption as possible on Tezos. I mean, I would draw the line at like outright criminal behavior. I would rather we don't see outright, evil criminal behavior that happens. But fundamentally, the way I look at shitcoins, I don't see it as criminal behavior because I don't think that anyone who buys a shitcoin, anyone who buys a bold shitcoin somehow on Base is like under the impression that, my goodness, I am buying an equity into a viable business here. No, that is nonsense. No one does that, nor do they think that somehow, there's a, this thing is anything more than basically gambling. So people like gambling, people want to gamble. It's a good product market fit. If people want to launch shitcoin on Tezos, let them launch shitcoin on Tezos. Yes, it helps in adoption. It burns fees. So, certainly I would not want to see people doing horrible things to other people use Tezos, but this type of thing is basically not particularly. It's not savory, but it's not evil either. I wish Tezos would do a better job supporting community projects. So Tezos is a blockchain; it cannot support community project. Different players in the Tezos ecosystem can do so. Please do not use Tezos to refer to the Tezos ecosystem or to a specific entity that is cancer. They are the backbone of Tezos. There are plans to make sure good projects get more support in the future. The Tezos Foundation has given a lot of support to a lot of projects, and it's currently trying to make its budget sustainable, which means cutting a lot of budget and a lot of support, and it's all over the place. And people are not going to be happy about it, and that's unfortunate. But it's important for sustainability. But also, I would say it's not. You want your ecosystem to be sustainable. The product has to be able. The products that live on it have to be self-sustaining. And if we do comparative analysis of the chains, by far on other chains, projects are a lot less dependent on grants than they have been on Tezos. And I would say that the dependency on grants has been, if anything, unhealthy. What app would I like to see launch on Tezos? I would still love to see prediction markets launch on Tezos, although if I'm being honest, the product market fit has not been super well demonstrated. I just love the app, and I think it would be nice to have them. I would love to see applications making use of patronage, which is a rebranding of harbinger fees being launched for NFTs on Tezos. Would it be successful? I don't know. Is it something different that not enough people are trying? Yes. Social media apps. Things like FriendTech, but a little less degen than FriendTech. There's not a clone of Twitter, not as degen as FriendTech, somewhere in between. I think would be interesting. I would love to see more applications trying to build real-world assets on a chain. Perpetuals platform, derivative platforms, I think are cool as well. Am I happy with the result of the money spent on marketing? Of course not. No, it was the Tezos. Look, in 2020, if you listen to the community, everyone was like, "Oh, the only problem that Tezos has is marketing. There's just not enough marketing. More marketing, more marketing." There was not much of marketing muscle at the time. We decided to work with a community member who had been a long-standing community member and who had a strong background in marketing. They set up a big marketing operation. They advised the foundation on marketing, spent a lot of money. They were senior people inside the foundation overseeing this. I think there was a failure of overseeing the spending from the senior people. There was also a failure of that entity, of that marketing entity, to actually deliver results, measurable results. And I would say a failure on my part as a council member to basically notice that the management of the foundation was not tracking budgets correctly, and that the system was not performing enough. So it was, all of this basically came to a screeching halt in March of 2022. But it was expensive. That being said, the good news is that it was expensive at a time where the treasury of the foundation was much larger, and all of this was financed by selling Bitcoin at the height of the market. So, the impact on the treasury, if the marketing spending at the time had been much lower, wouldn't be that different. But nonetheless, I think the worst thing is not even the money spent; it's the time lost in not marketing Tezos properly. What are the most important KPIs coming from those initiatives? So the most important KPIs, I think, the one that are the most meaningful. You have Nielsen gives you things like number of eyeballs, like brand awareness. It's hard to measure. It's the thing that I find the most tractable is user activity on chain. And again, initially, if you look at the sports sponsorship, for example, there was not enough basically push on the side of the Tezos ecosystem entities to basically handle this. It was kind of left with hey, we really need marketing. We don't have much support. Here's a check. Please go and do marketing. And they were like, no, thanks for the check. Sure, the logo's on the car. You should just be happy with that. Now it's taken a very different form. If you look at what the Canvas team has done with the McLaren drop this year and with the menu drop this year, I don't think it's worse. I don't think it's worthwhile to do sports sponsorship, which is a lesson that the entire industry learned. I would say a lot of people basically followed the lead of FTX, and it turned because a lot of people saw that FTX knew what they were doing, and no, they did not. But I would say at least that we're getting a lot more out of it than we got in 2021 and 2022. Not enough, but a lot more. So it's been hundreds of thousands of accounts created. People are actually engaging with the chain more regularly. They're using Object, so there's a lot more coming out of it. Not enough, I would say, that to make a partnership. I would say an attractive strategy. But at least the contract being where they are and having what we have, I think it's making the best of it. What do you think of the Cardano treasury system funded by transaction and inflation and centralized funding system? I don't know it, so I would have to look at it to answer you. Is getting into the top 10 crypto market cap a priority for the Tezos Foundation and Trilly Tech? I mean, again, I'll give the response that I said before. It's not something that you can target. I'm sorry, but you can't just say. And this just annoys me to no end when people say if only the foundation understood that this is important, because people look at if only the foundation understood, then what would it do? Because fundamentally, it can only do the only thing that it can fundamentally do is try to help promote the growth of the Tezos ecosystem. That's its mission. And fundamentally, that's that goes through adoption. Now, does it mean it does necessarily a good job at adoption and marketing? No, it's done a lot of stupid things. There's a lot of mistakes in the past couple of years that are not good. But fundamentally, it's not about do they think it's important? Do they think it's not important? That's irrelevant. It's fantastically irrelevant. What's relevant is what it can actually do. And no, market making is not magic. And no, stopping the bakers or any of that is not magic. The only thing fundamentally that the Tezos Foundation can do is deploy its treasury towards fostering adoption and growth of the Tezos ecosystem. And it does this via funding R&D, adoption, projects building on Tezos. That's the type of thing it can do. It can do it better. And I would say if there are suggestions for better ways to do it, absolutely, that's something that should trickle back. If people have ideas for initiatives that can help target these things, but you want KPIs that you can actually measure and have a sense that you're making progress towards, and that's why I really like user adoption. It's not an end be all, but it gives you a really strong idea, and it's very measurable and it's very tractable. Solution. The ID is unique and proven by the state, and all the information are linked in some sort of ZK, onion. So some sort of zero knowledge solution for ID that's provided by states. I mean, I think there's a few projects that have been trying to do this type of things. Can they bring it to Tezos? I don't know to which extent there's government interest in those projects. Government sales cycles are very long. It takes a lot of time. They're very uncertain. So it would be a big commitment to focus on this. And again, I don't know how much activities that actually brings to the chain to have this type of things. As US bonds are rising interest rates, do you think we should raise Tezos inflation just above to look still attractive? As many people do not understand economics anyway. Okay, so the parenthesis helps because from an economics perspective, it shouldn't matter. I mean, we're back into the question of adaptive issuance, and the question, adaptive issuance will be whatever it needs. The point of adaptive issuance is the issuance is whatever it needs to be for 50% to be staked. And so if it's not attractive to stake, people will not do it, and that's it, and they won't be a stake. The payout will rise, and if it's attractive enough that more than 50% stake, then clearly you're paying too much, and it will lower. So you have an automatic mechanism for that. The question is do people like the idea of receiving 5% while being diluted by 5%? And that's is sometimes called the money illusion. Now the money illusion is the main reason to not do adaptive issuance. If the money illusion is a big factor into the ecosystem, then absolutely, if it's a huge factor, adaptive issuance might be not a good idea. And the thing is, I think it was a factor in 2020. When Tezos was in the top 10, as people mentioned, I think, when it got on Coinbase, and it was the first time that people were like getting, some sort of like rewards. Like I hold a cryptocurrency and I get more cryptocurrencies. That's new, because it happens through exchanges. Like before that they were staking, but it was not really staking. You could earn like as a validator in NXT and some of these things, but it wasn't the same thing. So when it happens through Coinbase, I think that really catalyzed Tezos. But at the same time, the problem is the narrative became entirely around baking and staking. It was like, oh, the future is staking. What is the value prop of Tezos? You can stake it. And I was terrified of that because I knew this was not going to last. You couldn't, I didn't see one single proposal for building something on Tezos that didn't involve baking. It's like, we're going to do an application, and then we're going to bake with the mesh. It's just like, and people were trying to make very contrived application that had to use baking, and it was just generally a bad idea. Baking should be boring. It should just do what it does. And so DeFi summer happened, and people were like, wait a second, I can get 20% by farming, in DeFi, so I'm going to do that instead. And Tezos didn't have much applications. It didn't have enough tooling to attract a lot of developers. A lot of that had been stagnant for a few years. And so as a result, like, this is, 2020 is when people actually started using blockchains, right? Before that, they're holding coins. Maybe they participate in ICOs, and that's most of what they're doing. And then DeFi summer happened, and they really start actually using those applications. And there's a lack of application of Tezos. And this is where we start turning, I would say, a dangerous corner. And that happened at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And at the time, the chain is nice, but it hasn't upgraded since, it hasn't had meaningful upgrade, I would say, since 2018. Consensus work is stagnant. The latency is high. It's a different stack that people are not used to. It's just not that attractive early 2021, despite a few things where it was strong. And I would say for DeFi type of applications, it was not very compelling. For NFTs and collectibles, where latency mattered less, where smart contract development mattered less, I think it was attractive, and that's why it had some success in this space. All that to say, I don't know to which extent it's still a thing. I think this may be behind us, and if it's behind us, then moving to adaptive issuance is a great idea. If it's still the case that the median Tezos holder is saying like, I get money every 3 days, great, then that's different. But we don't know that. And with exchanges progressively ending their staking program, you've seen I think Coinbase is no longer offering, they're still baking, but they're not offering rewards to users in California, in New York. And with the trend going in this direction, I think it's a bit dangerous to rely on a model where you have where you have dilution, and a lot of people are not actually eligible for getting the rewards because they're using exchanges. So I've thought of adaptive issuance for a few years. The one thing that made me think, okay, maybe now's the time, is when Coinbase and Kraken started being attacked for their staking program, and so that I think is an important catalyst. All right, so we had the bond question. Let me just make sure I'm not. Do you think the gap between adoption and S and Tez is too large to catch up at this point? No, because we've seen a lot of chains actually catch up. We've seen Polygon basically just in 6 months in a bull market, rise to level of usage, similar to Ethereum. I think we've seen the same happen with Solana as well. So we've seen two ecosystems basically manage to pull this off. I would say that the penetration is today, a lot of the adoption of ETH is more adoption of EVM than it is adoption of ETH. And so it's an opportunity for EVM compatibility. Just a lot of people and places have expertise in Solidity, have this type of resources, but they're not necessarily married to ETH. And the argument that ETH has is but we are, the most secure settlement. I don't think a lot of people care about the security of the Ethereum settlement because fundamentally, proof of stake protocols have not really successfully been hacked. So people pour money into DeFi protocols which are coated with Scotch tape and routinely get had for hundreds of millions. So the whole block security argument for Ethereum I think is quite weak. Maybe in the long run it becomes something more powerful, but I don't think it's a huge USP for them. I think the EVM one is more important, and the compatibility and maybe some of the bridging helps. So no, I don't think that the gap in adoption is too big. Gaps in narratives, visibilities, those are harder to bridge. It's also the case that I think the narrative around Tezos from like very early on was as an Ethereum hedge. It's kind of like it has there's a similar roadmap, there's a similar philosophy in terms of like goals to Ethereum, but maybe Ethereum doesn't have its shit together. Maybe Ethereum is going to fail. We don't know. There's a DAO hack. There's all of these bad things happening in Ethereum. And so the worse Ethereum has fared historically, the better Tezos has fared, because I think people people perceived Tezos as like what happens if Ethereum doesn't do well. And Tezos I think is like not doing as well in an environment where Ethereum is doing very well. And people are saying like, well, Tezos was our hedge against Ethereum failing, but clearly Ethereum has managed to like pull through, and therefore why should we care about Tezos? Whereas other ecosystems say like, if you're Cosmos, like, well, we're different with the instrument of blockchain and so on and so forth. So, it's not a narrative that I thought, that I personally like tried to go after, because I think it's never good to define yourself in terms of your competitors. But it's definitely a narrative that was projected onto Tezos by the Ethereum community. And now, and they're convinced that somehow Tezos started as like an Ethereum killer. But the term Ethereum killer was invented by Ethereum maximalists in the first place. So I think that's probably some of I would say a lot of the difficulties that are around narrative around here. Nicholas asked, how do I feel about every piece of infrastructure on Ethereum having their own token? Would you rather have L2s on Tezos have their own tokens or be tokenless? I mean, it's worked great for Ethereum because a lot of ETH users, they say like, oh wow, ETH has done so well. And they've lost a ton of money on tokens that were launched and dumped by Consensus, which then went on to fund Ethereum development. So, in some sense, it's worked out for them. The question is, do you want to take part of this? Like, do you want to just like launch and dump tokens on people just to like kind of foster Tezos? It might not work. First of all, it's ethically dubious. The point, part of the narrative of Tezos is like we don't need a token for everything, like consolidating things into a token. It's true that economically today, people want unbundling in some sense. If you have like a protocol that does X and Y and has like a token, probably the market cap of this token is lower than the market cap of a token that does X plus the market cap of a token that does Y. It's kind of like this weird sub-additive thing, which is why people are trying to launch token for everything. The question is like, how long does this last? And it depends why token are valued. And I think a lot of people are valuing token because they're basically buying narratives. So it's like, oh, here's a narrative, and I think that this narrative is going to do well. It's kind of the meme market, like people have this mock meme market on Reddit where they buy a meme and sell a meme, and it's the same thing as like, oh, here's Celestia, I'm buying a data availability token because data availability is a big trend. They don't think that this thing is going to ever like pay enough fees to return something, or like that they're going to need, like there's going to be like this massive demand for the token in terms of staking for doing this. They're just betting on a narrative. And the question is like, do we want to like launch into that, or do we want to just like preserve a historical narrative of like, and actually pushing strong is a narrative that, hey, you need only one token, because it is a differentiator. So I'm still on the side of basically having this differentiator and saying like, no, you don't need a token for everything. Let's just accrue everything onto Tez, because at least it's a differentiator for the ecosystem. Whereas if it's just a bunch of low market cap tokens which are launched like this, I don't think it makes a difference. An issue is international trade running on Eurodollars. Crypto has never filled that use case. Could Tezos be a token used for international trade? That would be needed for it to be. I don't know enough about the international trade on the Eurodollar. I would need to understand the use case better. I think like if tomorrow something happened, I would say it's probably would not be Tez that would compete here. It would probably be like trying to give rails to a stablecoin would probably be more likely to succeed in this environment. And then the question is like what it is that you offer that makes it attractive compared to other blockchains. Maybe it's throughput again. What's the lowest realistic blockchain we can achieve while keeping our decentralization on L1? I mean, a lowering of a block time, you're going to lose a little bit. I think there's probably a sweet spot around 1 or 2 seconds. I think below that, you start getting more people in data centers. With 2 seconds, again, you get like your Starlink in a Savannah type of latency, which is a good benchmark. And then if you want to go below that, then you might as well try to like shoot for like the 200 millisecond, 400 millisecond type of thing. But then I think everyone ends up in data centers. how often should we expect this kind of MS from now on? This is great. Yeah, that's a good thing. I don't know. Let's try and shoot for once a month, because there's a good video room here in London, and a lot more people have been using it. The thing is, like, I often don't feel like going in front of the cameras and just talking about something because I'm not sure what people want to hear about. But with the questions streaming, it makes it easier. Are the California DMV, Ubisoft, and Société Générale all still building on Tezos? Well, I don't know if DMV is building on this. They are using Tezos. I know that much. I haven't been very close to this like specific integration. Ubisoft, I can't directly comment. And Société Générale, I think they still have things going on Tezos, but I'm not very, very close to this. I think a lot of the French adoption team have been very close to this use cases, and you would have to ask them those questions. And I also probably would say that they can't really discuss the client that they talk to because like most of them want confidentiality. Is Cassie Wood and Arc interested in Tezos? I don't know that they are. I've been on I've met Cassie a couple times. I mean, in person, I think, no, I've met her once in person. I've been on her Friday call oftentimes, and it's funny because I was able to talk about AI and proof of stake. So I was quite present last summer. So we'll see. I really like her. She's a very genuine person, very community driven, and she's very passionate about technology and progress in a way that's very contagious. Is TF Trill in the process of onboarding any new large enterprises onto Tezos? Again, so most of the like enterprise type of adoption stuff has happened more on a French team, and I would say until so Nomadic Labs, and until recently, I would say Tradec didn't really have like direct this type of direct corporate adoption work. Tradec recently hired a senior person for business development named Sidars, who come from the Polkadot ecosystem. So again, I would say Nomadic Lab would probably not comment on the corporate that they're talking to, and this type of adoption is fairly new for Trilitech. Are smart rollups functional live now? Yes, so you can run a smart rollup today, and it will work. So in that respect, it's live. Are there any smart rollups that I know of that are live on mainnet today? No. I think people are kind of waiting a little bit to see who's going to launch what. And probably the first one we're going to see are going to be like, I think we'll see like either like some developer on the weekend will write one and launch it on mainnet and say like, here you go. But you still need to stake 10,000 Tez, for it to keep running. So you do want some commitment. And I think the first one we'll see running are probably going to be forks of EtherLink that either EtherLink itself or forks of EtherLink like targeted for a specific dApp is probably what we'll see first. More partnership in light of Google, Manchester United, McLaren, Société Générale. Well, the ones like Manchester United and McLaren, even though like people like Manchester United have been a fantastic partner, I have nothing that positive thing to say about the relationship and the partner. In terms of like where our industry is and where our needs are, sports sponsorship is probably not the type of thing that would be useful. But in this market, it's also interesting because I would say that the Canvas team has been approached by a sports team wanting to do collectibles and not looking for sponsorship, just looking for an actual platform to do collectible, which I think is much more makes it much more interesting for adoption in terms of cost. Again, can't comment on any pending partnership of this kind, but primarily I don't think we need more partnership. I think primarily we need more applications, more users using Tezos on a day-to-day basis. Do you think the current governance system is good enough, or could it be improved? I mean, both. I think it's good enough, and I think it could be improved. So it's good enough. It's like, let me put it this way. There's a limited amount of core engineers working on Tezos, and they can work on improving the governance system of Tezos, or they can work on reducing latency. Probably reducing latency is today more critical than improving the governance system. I can think of a zillion ways to do it, but it roughly works. If we start having like big governance problems, if it starts being the case that the thing is broken and so on and so forth, we can always improve. But for now, I think it's sufficient. Do I see any generative AI adjacent apps for Tezos? I mean, of course. The Tezos art NFT scene. One of the things that really kickstarted it is when the artist Mario Klingemann, Quasimodo, started minting on Tezos, and he's an artist. Like, he's one of the earliest AI generative artists, and he did it at a time where you didn't get a perfect artwork. So in some sense, it's this very eerie creations out of generative adversarial network that he was doing. So we've had there's been a link between the AI generative art and Tezos community for a long time. For generative AI specifically, I don't see a ton of things, unfortunately, because it's a huge trend. There's something maybe in trying to pay people for GPUs for inference, not training, but inference, like having distributed network of GPUs, you can sort of do that. Then of course, there's all the other things saying like, hey, here's a chatbot that will talk to you about the Tezos ecosystem, or help you with the docs. But that's not a very, very deep integration. Fundamentally, you can think of ledgers as generative AI is this very creative thing that works in very free form, and blockchains are these very predictable things that do accounting. And so there's not a huge match. You definitely don't want an AI running and trying to do transactions, because you want it to be very predictable and actually follow simple business logic. So very unfortunately, because I do tend to have expertise in this, my background is in AI prior to doing Tezos, I don't see a lot of direct thing. I was in a panel at Google Next, which was called opportunities for your company at the intersection of Web3 and generative AI. And I said, well, I can talk about the union. The intersection is a little more different. I mean, I can make up some things, if we have more AI agents, then they need some currency to trade, and it's easier for them to just open a crypto wallet than it is for them to start opening bank accounts. A bank account is becoming harder and harder in the world to open bank accounts today, and definitely an AI agent will not easily be able to open a bank account, and maybe bank accounts won't allow people to let AI agents use their bank accounts. So maybe there's an opportunity for crypto here, not directly for Tezos. Potentially building games which are enabled by generative AI is an opportunity. The opportunity being that studios are completely sleeping on this, and so maybe if we do it, we just end up having successful games, irrespective of whether or not they have a blockchain integration, and use that as a distribution channel. So that is one idea, but it's not there's this deep synergy between generative AI itself and the blockchain space. Here, the only synergy is we know it matters and other people don't, so let's use that as an opportunity to try to do Tezos stuff. Do we have plans to make further inroads into the US? I think it's, there's not a whole lot. The Tezos Foundation doesn't do much there. I think it has a few grantees there, but by and large, a lot has been focused on Asia, and a lot of it's been on Europe. I think it is an important market. It is a difficult one. It's definitely going through a big, a lot of courtroom drama at the moment, and a lot of political drama. And I think we're going to get a lot more clarity in the coming year, which would be a good opportunity to look at it as a market. I think also Asia has a lot of opportunities, but sometimes it's about finding the right people, the right advocates, the right the right ambassadors. So what's really needed to get back on track for market performance? Again, sentiment. It's these things trade fundamentally on sentiment, and it's very hard to, the tragedy is fundamentally you have regulators saying oh, it depends on the efforts of others, but not really, and so you still you are in this thing which is largely driven by sentiment, by other markets. All of these things are super correlated to one another. So it's only the relationship is only fairly faint, and unfortunately, I think it's very, very narrative driven. Tezos raised the biggest amount of BTC. No, Tezos didn't raise anything. Tezos is a blockchain network. The Tezos Foundation raised BTC and ETH. It was not an ICO because no coins were being offered. The ICO was not an ICO because no coins were being offered. And ETH was not an ICO because no coins were being offered. And ETH was not an ICO because no coins were being offered. And ETH was not an ICO because no coins were being offered. And ETH was not an ICO because no coins were being offered. So it's only That 10K commitment for for the 10K commitment for launching a rollup. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be set in the protocol. I suppose we could make it customizable, and people will decide whether or not to trust the rollup based on like the size of the bond that has been attached to it. Is there any rough ETF for UHT? Closer to 1 year or 2 years? Closer to 2 years. There's an idea I have for something in between, which I've been thinking of, called like Tezos 1.5, where instead of having like this big rollup where you have all the contract interoperate, you run a single rollup, but which is running like multiple blockchains around multiple CPUs. So it's kind of like execution sharding. So imagine running like one Tezos chain, one Ethereum chain, one chain based on JavaScript, and they're all like running separately, but it's still one rollup node. So you get the benefit of like, you get some execution sharding across CPUs, but they get to talk to each other directly without any latency, without any withdrawal latency. So that is achievable much more quickly than Tezos UHT, and potentially a good step. So you can imagine e-selling, for example, having a Tezos rollup attached to it, so that essentially like you can deploy Tezos application on that rollup, and then have immediate like 1 block latency, or even less than that, transfers between one and the other, which solves the question around NFT. So you get this kind of like monolithic, type of rollup with different type of techs and like easy transfers, but you don't get the full interoperability and like, I have a Tezos contract that calls an Ethereum contract that calls a JavaScript contract and all of the type of thing. You don't get that, which is what you get in UHT, but you do get something that's quite nice, and that can be much faster. What do you think about the recent fanfare about ETH roadmap to enshrine rollups? I mean, that's been the big success of Vitalik, is like taking things, renaming them, or like pretending that he came up with them, and like, didn't you know that that Ethereum invented proof of stake, according to Anshin Horowitz? Do you think the crypto media in large part ignore us? I think the media respond to clicks as well. They just have a bigger audience, so they realize that if they talk about Ethereum, they'll get more clicks. That's I don't think there's like a conspiracy in the media to not talk about Tezos or anything like that. I think they just respond to incentive, and it's basically like it's something that creates network effect. Like the more the media talks about you, the more the media talks about you. They're also not clear on what the narrative is. Like, people want a simple narrative, and there's just like not a good simple narrative for Tezos. Like, there's governance, but they feel like, well, Ethereum seems to be upgrading. What's the problem? There's smart contract security, and no one seems to care about smart contract security. So yeah, I would say like narrative, and some of it is also circular. It's about having enough, I would say, to get in the eyes of the press, and then staying there by having a constant stream of attention. What percentage of all current DeFi makes sense to you? I don't have the percentage, but I can tell you what makes sense. Like, I mean, trading makes sense. People want to trade tokens. Like, there's demand. People are going to want to trade tokens, so it makes sense. And people are going to want to borrow against their token. That makes even more sense. Now, a lot of these like dexes, even if it's circular, right? A lot of these dexes make sense. The part that don't make sense for me is like the DeFi whose activity is only basically entirely subsidized, right? Most of the farming, like people saying like, oh, I'm farming this thing and I'm farming this thing. What's the use case? The use case is farming, and that's a ton of DeFi. So even if something like, let's say GMX is like driven by people wanting to gamble with leverage on like one token versus the other, this type of things, it's real in a sense of like people are paying fees, they want to trade, they want to do this thing. Whereas a lot of the DeFi today is basically like I forked an existing contract and I put it there, and like people are using it because they're waiting for an airdrop or because they are getting like some farm token. That makes zero sense. And a lot of it has gone down, like the whole like food coin type of era of 2021 that's largely died out. What do you think about adding a 6 governance stage where a proposal sits for 5 cycles before being voted in to give competing proposals time and equal footing? I mean, the thing is like you could do that offline. You could basically just publish it and like, well, I guess someone would inject it anyway. So the idea basically is like, when there's a proposal, we want people to be able to tweak that proposal and make something. I guess we could do it, but like, isn't the better option to just be involved in core protocol development to begin with? Because it's not like the core protocol development is close to these ideas or close to changing things, and sure, we can do that, but it needs to be implemented. It's going to further slow down the governance cycle, and I would rather at least try. So come on the protocols if you'd like, and discuss those ideas around protocol development. It's also the case that this only happens when there's kind of these economic things that touch the protocol, and I don't think there's many of them that's are coming. One of them was around the time we've seen this has been around liquidity baking, and we've seen it around adaptive issuance. Sorry, I mean it is inflation, but inflation, sometimes people use inflation to means the issuance of more of a currency. That's the initial meaning, but then now people mean inflation to mean an increase in price, and so issuance is a better term for it. But I go back and forth. So I don't see a whole lot of those that would come in a future where there would be this kind of strong opinion things around parameters. But I would say the first step is come in the protocols, see if that does it, and if that doesn't, then think through that. Okay. What type, for brushing of Tezos, what type of needs you thought it could fulfill in the real world? Well, primarily I wasn't focused on application development actually. And I would say Tezos had to be retrofit to be a very big application platform. They were smart contracts, but they were mostly meant to be there's a few smart contracts multi-sig and tokens and so on and so forth. They've been formally verified, as opposed to this is a big development environment and you're developing all sorts of new contracts every day. Because fundamentally, I saw that most of the value would come from being store of value, means of payment. And I still think means of exchange. And I still think that's the main use case for cryptocurrencies. It's just that people have decided that they really, really want to see them used as application platforms. So Tezos has become a really good application platform, but it took some time. It was in the initial focus. And I still think to this day that being a censorship resistant means medium of exchange and store of value is the main use case for cryptocurrencies. And then people will say, oh, but there's Bitcoin then. And I'm like, yep. But Bitcoin has problems, and so but if you think that Bitcoin is never going to have any problem and is always going to fulfill that function, which I don't think is true, because they don't have a security budget going forward. It doesn't accommodate for enough transactions. So there's a lot of issues. But if you're thinking that use case is basically covered, I don't see a whole lot of need for a lot of other blockchains. The point of Tezos, and a lot of Tezos is designed basically. A lot of the Tezos design is centered on something that's huge. The governance is very important. If you're this huge, very, very, very big network that's used everywhere, the governance is very important in this case. Especially because you can pay for public goods, you can do all these sort of things. When it's small, I think it's important to have it early on, because it's not something that you can tack on later. So you want to have it from the get-go. Similarly, I thought that it was important to have proof of stake from the beginning, because it's hard to tack on later if your governance can be censored by miners. But by and large, Tezos solves a lot of problems that a major dominant blockchain can face, and so a lot of it may be overkill, I would say, for the type of for the position that it is in, which is why I think it has to compete on things like performance. What do you think about increasing Tezos block size? The first thing to do would be to have a unification of gas and blocks and limit. So we have a size limit and a gas limit on the block, and it doesn't really make sense to have a size limit. What we should have is charge gas for the downloading of the block, because storing is basically free, and then have a unification. It's a pending thing in the core protocol. It's a small thing, it needs to be done. And once we have that, I think it's possible to extend the block, which would be helpful, because until such a point as we have data availability layers, it could make it even cheaper to run some data availability for rollups. So it would be a great thing to have. Fourth or fifth kinds of code. You know what? I've only been through one, and I had plans. I do have to check my schedule. Maybe make sure I'm not running over time, or maybe I have already run so much over time that I have run already over time. Well. So, what else do we have? Okay, so I'm still in my first can of Coke. All right, I think the questions have dried up now, so I'll leave it at that. I think it's been about 90 minutes. Thanks everyone for attending. Let's try to make this a monthly thing. Cheers and bye bye.